Hi students, welcome to lecture 2 of chapter 20, and we're going to talk a little bit about political philosophy. And this is a great topic for your understanding of government policies. This is going to bleed into next week when we talk about the government's taxation policies. Why or why not should the government tax at certain rates and certain brackets at certain levels? These are philosophical questions as well as economic questions. And so right now, we're going to talk about some of the prevailing philosophies that drive decision-making as far as what should we do or not do about poverty and income inequality in the United States. So we're going to start out talking about the first of the political philosophies, and it's called utilitarianism. Okay, utilitarianism. Hold this up for a minute so that you can get this down in your notes. All right. Utilitarianism is is a philosophy that goes beyond just economics. These philosophers were not primarily economists, but primarily philosophers, and they had these ideas about multiple things. I'm going to talk about some of the history of utilitarianism in just a second, but the originators of this are Jeremy Bentham and his student John Stuart Mill. You'll see these philosophers quoted a lot in various places on various topics, philosophers of the 1800s. And utilitarianism, you might have heard expressed before as something like the greatest good for the greatest number. Okay, if you've ever heard that expression, we should do whatever provides the greatest good for the greatest number of people. That's a utilitarian view. It's closely related to pragmatism, and that's important for our discussion today. But taking a look, this philosophy we're going to define as saying that the government should choose to maximize the total utility of everyone in society. What should the government do? It should choose policies that maximize the total utility of everyone in society. So since you have a pause button, I'm going to put this down and continue. So utilitarianism, when it comes to solving the poverty or income inequality process, it takes a very decided view about what's practical or pragmatic. And so since utilitarianism defines morality to an extent as what's practical or pragmatic or what works, okay? So there's not too much of an issue here of justice or rightness, but no, what works and what's pragmatic and what brings about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And so the utilitarians, they take a view of how income equality or poverty should be handled by applying practical solutions. Now, Bentham and Mill were influential in the 1800s public health movement, right? Following Edwin Chadwick and the ideas that, you should install sewage because that's the greatest good for the greatest number of people, right? Drawing sewage away doesn't matter if it cost the society something, it's good for the entire society, and so it should be done, right? You can understand this philosophy. I don't think it's a great life philosophy, but that's for a philosophy class, okay? But let's talk about what it means economically. So in utilitarianism, the idea is we want to maximize, okay, the best for as many people as possible. We want to give to the society a more equal distribution of income if possible, because the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So to a utilitarian, the way that you arrive at this is not primarily to talk about property rights or not primarily to talk about some concept of social justice or equalization, but to talk about, well, what would be best for the greatest amount of people. And to Bentham and Mill, what would be best is if some of the income from the higher ups is redistributed to the people further down in the quintiles. Now, why is that? The why is important, okay? The why is because they'll have a better life and a greater number of people will be given more parts of the income. Now, they rely, Bentham and Mill, on the idea of diminishing marginal utility. Diminishing marginal utility is a great concept. We talked a little bit about it last week in the labor market, that idea that one more of something brings about less of a result. So diminishing marginal utility or diminishing marginal returns, think of it this way, okay? If you were to go into a developing country in West Africa, okay, and you were to locate a business that had been operating completely on paper, for all its record keeping, for all its inventory, and you were to give them a computer. Well, the impact on that business, okay, is going to be super great. It's going to move that business forward by leaps and bounds, because everything that they had to do the old, slow way can now be maximized, sped up. The record keeping process, right, can be simplified. And so the business can now be more mobile and portable. That computer can be taken with the business if it needs to move seasonally. And so we just say, wow, this one computer has had a massive impact in this West African business. Now imagine that you took a nice computer like that and you dropped it off at Amazon, okay? Or you dropped it off at AT&T, or you dropped it off at Publix. Well, that computer would probably help those businesses. But the impact, okay, of one more computer in a business that already has a lot of technology and a lot of computers at its hands is a diminishing marginal utility. In other words, at some point, every computer that you drop off in a business impacts that business just a little bit less. It doesn't mean it's not bringing about a positive result, but it's a diminishing marginal utility. Well, as utilitarians, Bentham and Mill simply said, well, for a rich person, right, every dollar more that they have just doesn't bring about the impact for them that it would for someone in the poor classes. And so, because they don't believe that what matters is property rights or justice or the idea of ownership, but what they believe matters is their version of what's fair, their version of what's the general good, they believe that since those dollars in the higher impact markets give people diminishing marginal utility. In other words, a millionaire, a billionaire, an extra dollar for them or an extra $10,000 for them certainly doesn't impact them the same way it would for a poor person, then it is a good thing and it is a good political philosophy to redistribute the income down to the lower classes. Okay? Now, important, because Bentham and Mill believe in the greatest good for the greatest number, they do not believe in a total equalization of incomes. They do not believe in a massive redistribution scheme that's goal is to transfer all the wealth to all the quintiles equally or to all people equally. They don't believe that. And the reason why is because they're pragmatists, all right? And as pragmatists, they recognize another of Mankiw's principles, which is people respond to incentives. And so as pragmatic utilitarians, Bentham and Mill would say, yeah, but if you do this too much, if you do too much moving of these dollars from the upper down to the lower classes, you will kill the incentive that practically people in the upper classes have to go out and earn those dollars, to go out and make that money, to go out and invest so that they can get a return on their investment, to start new businesses. And so they stop short of a total redistribution scheme. Does that make sense? And so they say, we're going to redistribute this in a utilitarian way to the point of utility, meaning happiness for the greatest number of people. And if you believe in utilitarianism, you are going to, at the end of the day, believe that it is okay to redistribute income as far as it brings about a more general good for society. Okay, our next political philosophy that we're going to take a look at is liberalism. Now, this liberalism is not classical liberalism, okay? This author, John Rawls, who wrote his book, A Theory of Justice, came out in the 1970s. So this is a modern liberalism, as you would think about it when someone is called a liberal, both economically and socially, okay? So John Rawls is a modern day liberal, not a classical liberal. And and his work, The Theories of Justice, points out this idea, okay? That, I'm going to read this to you so that you can get it down. Government should choose policies deemed to be just, as evaluated by an impartial observer behind a veil of ignorance. Two important terms there, the idea of just policy and the idea of the veil of ignorance, okay? And so that's what a liberal believes. So when a liberal looks at the situation of income inequality, they operate from a position of justice. And in this case, we could properly call this social justice. When you hear people talking about, oh, I fight for social justice, they might very well be making the points of John Rawls, okay? And John Rawls is saying there's a justice out there, there's a morality out there, and that justice, that morality, to his mind, is achieved by a far more equitable distribution of money. He operates on the principle that social justice says that people should make more nearly incomes close to each other than widely divided. Okay, our next political philosophy is going to dispute that at the very basis. But right now, I just want to look at what a liberal thinks. Okay, and they think that, duh, everyone should make an equal amount of money if possible. They recognize it's not possible, but that would be their desire, because in their mind, that is justice. It is justice for there not to be gaps in income. Okay, in a perfect world, and they'd like to get as close to that perfect world in the real world as possible, people would make the same amount of money. All right, and income would be equally distributed. So one has to ask, well, okay, according to what principles? Well, according to justice. And who's going to do it? Well, Rawls and friends, okay? The government is going to do this. So the government is going to redistribute income. Now, they're going to carry about their principles of justice, but how do you get to justice? Well, Rawls gives an example where he says, I want you to imagine that people are operating behind a veil of ignorance. All right, let's talk about what he means. So he asks his readers to think about what it would be like if they were put into a scenario not knowing anything about their particular talents, their particular ability to earn, their particular life circumstances that they're heading into. And with that said, if, according to Rawls, if you ask the people in this room, what do you think we should do about the distribution of wealth in society? Those people operating behind this veil of ignorance, not knowing the future, they would think, well, what if I'm in the bottom fifth? What if I'm in the lower rungs? I have no idea because I'm behind the veil of ignorance, and not knowing anything, I'm going to want to make a decision that favors those in the bottom rungs. And so he says, because people, according to Rawls' theory, will operate like this, then that is a good criterion to operate the distribution of income for. That veil of ignorance helps us, according to Rawls, set just rules for society, rules that operate according to the principles of social justice. And what we're going to do is we're going to move money from the top income getters down to the lower people on the income scale, because that is a just thing to do, and because it is what we would decide were we behind the veil of ignorance, okay? And he operates this on this principle called the maximum criterion. Government, okay, when it thinks about who it wants to favor, who it wants to help with its policies, it should think about helping the worst off person in society. That's the role of government, okay? For a liberal, the role of government, okay, according to John Rawls' theory, is to help out those that are least prepared, those that are least income earners, those that are the most downtrodden. That's the goal of government. Now, some people don't believe that's the goal of government, but that's what Rawls believes. And so because he believes that that's the role of government and the proper role of government, then who better to redistribute the income to more equality than government itself? And so, whereas the pragmatists, the utilitarians, don't believe that they're going to get close to an equal distribution of wealth, and my friends, they don't believe you should, because they do recognize the pragmatic implication of incentive. Rawls says, no, the total goal should be for redistribution of wealth to the lowest in society, getting that gap. Remember that gap where we talked about that the top quintile is taking 46.7% of the income and the lowest is only taking 4.1%. Well, you just take this share of the income and you just push it down there. And you do this through forms of social insurance. Social insurance as far as people's housing, people's money, people's health care, people's child care, people's job training. This is all a social network, social insurance that provides redistribution of wealth. Okay, it has to take the money from somewhere. The money isn't just made by a fairy. It takes the money from people who are the haves and delivers it to the have-nots. And this is all based, according to Rawls, on principles of social justice and the maximum criterion, which is helping out that worst off person in society. That's how you develop your governmental principles, and that is right and good to do. Okay, for the last of our philosophies, we're going to talk about libertarianism. Now, libertarians also have other political philosophies. We're going to focus on the libertarian view of economics. Some conservatives hold to a libertarian view of markets, but don't consider themselves to be libertarians in the social things, such as the abortion issue, drug legalization, things like that. Libertarian tends to believe that the government should be as laissez-faire as possible and keep their hands off. Thomas Sowell is an obvious libertarian, and you can tell because he talked about that. Remember, I told you in the last video how he has a problem with the very idea of income distribution. We saw that in the chapter 16 questions that I think we just did, or 9, I can't remember which one it was, where he talked about income distribution. Even the term itself is a fallacy. Why does he think that? Well, that's because libertarians question the very basis of both utilitarianism and liberalism, okay? And the basis of those things is that there's some kind of right, okay? They question the whole entire idea of income distribution to begin with. Okay, they don't believe that there is such a thing as income distribution, as in income is being handed out by some force or planner. They believe that income is flowing to its most natural uses. And, okay, they don't believe that there is a right for any kind of social planner or central planner to distribute income, okay? They question the very right of a government to do this. Now, utilitarianism and liberalism are similar, Mankiw says, because they both assume the right to make incomes more equal. Whereas a libertarian says, you have no right to attempt to make incomes more equal. You can look at government policies, and you can look at marketplaces, and you can look at economic freedom, and you can try to open up that freedom in order for people to raise themselves and raise themselves in an income bracket, but you cannot simply just redistribute wealth from one part of the society to another. And so a libertarian questions the very basis of this, okay? So government, get this down, please. According to libertarianism, government should punish crimes and enforce voluntary agreements, but not redistribute income. So does a libertarian believe that there's no role for government? No, they don't believe that. They believe that government is there to enforce justice in the terms of the law to protect property rights, not social justice, okay, but criminal justice, and also that the government is there to enforce contracts, so that in business, if someone tries to renege, if someone tries to cheat on a deal, government is there to say, no, you signed a contract, therefore this should go forward. So if someone buys thousands of face masks, okay, and they put their money out with good faith, and then the person doesn't deliver, well, government should be able to get involved, according to a libertarian, and should be there to right and solve that injustice. Okay, if someone steals from another person, government has a role to play in stopping that injustice, but government does not have any role in the redistribution of income. Here's a quote from a libertarian's book that's in Mankiw. It says, "What each person gets, he gets from others who give to him in exchange for something, or as a gift. In a free society, diverse persons control different resources, and new holdings arise out of the voluntary exchanges and actions of persons." So he says there is no distribution of income. People have resources, right? Everybody is involved. All households are involved in the factor market. They have labor, they have land, they have capital. Okay, and they go out into the marketplace and barter and trade with voluntary exchange. They give their labor, they give their goods, they give their land, they rent it, and they are able to do this in a free society to go about, and that causes resources to flow to them. You know, a quick example, when I went to college in Clearwater, and so kind of the Saturday thing to do was to go down to Clearwater Beach with your friends. But one thing that was very rough about Clearwater, especially at that point, is that there wasn't a lot of public parking. And so the parking would fill up very, very early in the day. And the parking was also quite expensive. So if you did not get there first off in the morning, you'd just be driving around downtown Clearwater, hoping for a space to open up so that you could get to the beach. And so what people would do down in Pinellas County, and I don't know if there's been some ordinances since then that don't allow this. Sometimes you'll see this if you go to a sporting event. But what people would do is they would have these properties, little old, lower middle class Florida homes down by Clearwater Beach. Probably it was a really middle class because the property value is down there, but they didn't look like anything special, kind of a lot with some Florida crabgrass out front and a, palm tree and a shell driveway. And these people would go out on a Saturday and they would get a lawn chair and stand out in their yard, and they would charge $5 or $7 per car to park right on their lawn, right? And these lawns, they would be packed with cars, and the homeowner would be out there and they would let people park on their lot. And this is a way that they made some extra money every Saturday, okay? They took something that was theirs, all right, their land. I don't know if they owned that land or they were renting that land, but either way, they took the land that they owned and they turned it into a profit, right? So capital, money, right? Income, it flowed to those people because they made use of the resources that they had. The income didn't get distributed to them, okay? They made use of the tools that they had. This is the same as someone who, like Sam, who goes and puts a bunch of ice pops in a cooler and gets down to the beach and starts selling them. He takes his ingenuity, his labor hours, his capital and fruit juice and popsicle sticks, he puts it in this cooler and he goes out and the resources flow to him, okay? A libertarian believes that the government should only be there, okay, to intervene in this process when someone is stealing from another person, when someone is wronging someone by not following a contract, these issues that need a remedy from a justice side, okay, or from a police side. But government has no right to determine the flow of income. Now, Mankiw concludes this section with an interesting thing about the veil of ignorance. He says that a libertarian would question Rawls' whole premise of the veil of ignorance. He says, if you were to say to a group of people, okay, you're behind a veil of ignorance and you could be in any one of 5 economic quintiles. You have no idea, and there's no way to know what you're going to be. What kind of laws should we make? What kind of distribution scheme should we set up? He questions Rawls and says, people won't necessarily just assume that they're going to be in the bottom bracket. And he says, if you're operating behind the veil of ignorance, people just as might well define justice as letting it fall to who it falls, letting economics flow in a natural and uninterrupted state. So he questions Rawls' very premise of, well, behind the veil of ignorance, we would all pick to help the lowest person in society because we all think that we might be that person. Libertarian says, no, people don't necessarily think like that. They believe that even if they are the lowest person, that an income mobility, social mobility can allow them to rise, and they don't want laws that penalize them in case they are in the upper levels, okay? And so Mankiw uses the example of grades, right? Let's say that before the class started, you didn't know the syllabus, you didn't know what type of assignments there were, you did not know the percentage of weights, you did not know how you would be assessed. Okay, so you're behind a veil of ignorance about your grade for the class. And Mankiw says, would you necessarily agree to a policy that says, well, at the end of this class, I want the points that the top grade getters get, I want them distributed down, and I want them, everyone's grade in the class to be far more equalized? Would you make decisions assuming that you are the lowest person in the class and that therefore you should make policies that benefit you as that lowest person? Mankiw kind of sides a little bit. He comes out just a little bit here and he says, is that necessarily true? Do you really believe that you would say, knowing that you could be the top grade getter, the second the second to the top, even the middle, would you want to give your points that you potentially will have earned just to cover your basis in case you're the lowest quintile? And so they question Rawls' idea. They say Rawls' theory that, well, given the veil of ignorance, we would all protect ourselves just in case we're the lowest person. And so that's the maximum criterion, is what we're going to make all decision making on. First of all, it takes out any idea of right and wrong, as pragmatists do and as social planners do, because they believe that they are the instruments of morality in the society. Libertarianism would say that the system is best given to distribute resources. Now, libertarians, let me just say this, I'm not going to speak about every libertarian, okay? But not all libertarians acknowledge the idea of a moral justice of right and wrong. They acknowledge the law, okay, as a observer and a protector of property rights, but they don't necessarily see that as moral. I think a free market conservative would say that there's a moral aspect to why you can't just redistribute income as you see fit, because there are such things as property rights, and people do own the fruits of their labor, their property, their labor hours, and their capital. And so just say, well, I think you have too much of this, or I don't think you're going to enjoy this as much as a poor person would because of diminishing marginal utility, or I think my view of justice allows me to reach inside your wallet and take it and redistribute it. A free market conservative would say that there is an actual moral wrong, and they would call it stealing. There's a book, a famous book that a Frenchman, Frederick Bastiat, wrote. He's a libertarian, but more morally minded libertarian in French history. And he talked about this idea of the redistribution of income. It's really a great read. I might stick some quotes of it up in this section just for you to take a look at. And he really talked about the idea that the fact that we think that we have a right to what someone else has earned just because we don't have it, he says that's called plunder. And his whole essay was based on the idea of plunder. And it was kind of interesting. He said, once you introduce what's called legal plunder, right? Illegal plunder is when I come to you and I take the money out of your wallet and run, and I punch you in the face and it's a crime. He says legal plunder is when the government does that for me, okay, in a sense, in a shortcut. And so he believes that legal plunder, once it has been taken and once it has been done and okayed by a government, he said everybody's going to want a piece of that pie. He said even people who have a sense of justice, rightness, morality, property rights, once they see plunder, legalized plunder, they'll say, well, wait a minute, what about my piece of the pie? Where do I get in on this? They won't say, no, that's unjust and wrong, because they see so many other people benefiting. They'll think, well, if this is the society we have, then I too am going to join into the legal plunder. I'll try to stick some quotes up on Bastiat. Maybe I'll even put his whole piece up. It's an excellent read before you graduate. When we had a philosophy class, we always read it together. I will leave that, and we're going to move on to specific government policies in the next lecture. So have a great day.